The autumn air in London held a crisp charge, a whisper of impending spectacle. For months, the world had waited not just for a film, but for a moment, a return to grandeur after a season of silence. The premiere of No Time to Die was far more than a Hollywood event. It was a global cultural reset, and at its epicenter stood the Royal Albert Hall, a monument of Victorian ambition now thrumming with 21st-century anticipation. Its terracotta facade was bathed in the iconic cyan blue light of the Bond franchise, a beacon visible across Hyde Park. But the true signal, the one that sent a synchronized flutter through the hearts of the gathered thousands and the global press corps, was the confirmation, discreet yet undeniable, from the Palace Press Office. Their Royal Highnesses the Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall would attend. This was not merely a star-studded night. It was a fusion of crown and cinema, of timeless traditions stepping onto the crimson carpet of modern myth-making. The question hung in the illuminated mist. How would the future king and his consort navigate this glitzy, high-security, and emotionally charged arena? A world of fictional spies, real-world celebrity, and a nation's watchful eye? Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall, stood before a grand mirror in her private dressing room at Clarence House, its surface reflecting a scene of organized calm that belied the evening's significance. Her dress, a deep, shimmering navy blue gown by Bruce Oldfield, lay carefully across a chaise lounge. The color was a deliberate nod, not just to the Bond palette, but to a sense of solemn duty. Tonight was an act of public service, a carefully considered foray back into the whirl of major public events. Her dresser moved with quiet precision, but Camilla's own hands were steady. She discussed final notes with her private secretary, a murmur about the evening's key attendees, the producers, the veteran actors, the new 007. This was reconnaissance. For her, the premiere was a diplomatic mission disguised as a night out. She understood the language of these events, the meaningful glance, the perfectly timed handshake, the ability to put a nervous young actor or a grieving producer at ease. Her role was to provide warmth, a grounded, reassuring presence. She thought of the film's storyline, of loss and legacy, themes not unfamiliar to the family she had married into. As the final touches were applied, a discreet diamond bracelet, familiar pearls, her reflection showed not a movie fan, but a seasoned representative steeling herself for a delicate and very public performance. Across London, in the more modern confines of his office, Prince Charles was in a different kind of preparation. Dressed already in his classic tuxedo, he was on the telephone, his conversation not about film, but about forestry. For a full 10 minutes, he spoke with a passion about a new initiative for sustainable woodlands in Cornwall. This was the rhythm of his life. The ceremonial and the practical, the glittering and the granular, forever intertwined. Hanging up, he turned to his equerry with a slight, knowing smile. Right then, he said, the words a gentle sigh. Time to enter the world of fantasy, I suppose. For Charles, the evening held a different weight. He was a patron of the British Film Institute, a genuine supporter of the arts. This was not a distraction from his work, but an extension of it, a championing of a colossal British export. He recalled meeting Sir Sean Connery in the past, the gravity the actor brought to the role. He thought of the millions this franchise employed, the national pride it generated. His attendance was a strategic nod to soft power, to the global reach of British creativity. As he checked his cufflinks, simple, gold, his mind was already navigating the choreography of the evening. The walk, the greetings, the brief words with Daniel Craig. He would be polite, engaged, but his thoughts, as ever, would be partly elsewhere, on the real world, its crises and its chronic needs, which even a Bond could not vanquish with a Walther PPK. The Royal Albert Hall was a fortress of glamour. The cyan light cut through the dusk, painting the milling crowds in an otherworldly glow. The roar was a physical force, a wall of sound made of screams, camera shutters, and shouted questions. On the carpet, the galaxy of stars moved in a slow, dazzling orbit. Daniel Craig, solemn and elegant, his wife Rachel wise of vision and gold, Rami Malek, a study in intense charisma. Lashana Lynch, radiating powerful grace. They paused, posed, gave sound bites about the end of an era. The energy was electric, bittersweet, celebratory. Then, a perceptible shift. The media pens, a seething mass of photographers, stilled for a second before erupting with renewed, frantic urgency. A wave of movement swept down the security line. The royal car, a sleek, dark Bentley, had glided to a halt. The door opened. First, Prince Charles emerged, offering a hand to Camilla. The sound changed. The screams of Daniel were joined by a more respectful, but no less eager, chorus of cheers and calls. They did not walk the long carpet. Theirs was a shorter, more dignified path, but they paused at the entrance. Charles, ever the environmentalist, noted the hybrid vehicles in the motorcade display with an approving nod to an official. Camilla caught the eye of a young fan holding a Union Jack, giving a small, genuine wave that sent the girl into delighted tears. They moved inside, leaving the cacophony behind, crossing the threshold from the modern cult of celebrity into the hushed, historic grandeur of the hall's interior. The real performance, the nuanced dance of their duty, was about to begin. Inside, the atmosphere was one of pressurized excitement. The red of the carpets deepened, the chandeliers glittered like ice, and the air hummed with the privileged murmur of over 5,000 guests. The royals were guided not to the general throng, but to a receiving line, a curated list of key figures. Here, the choreography was impeccable. Charles shook hands with producers Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson, his conversation likely touching on the film industry's recovery. "You've carried the weight of expectation with remarkable fortitude," he was heard to say. With Daniel Craig, the exchange was longer. They spoke of the physical demands of the role, of the commitment required over 16 years. "You've given a great deal of yourself to the country, in a very different way," Charles said, and Craig's polite smile softened into something more appreciative. Camilla, meanwhile, engaged Lashana Lynch and Léa Seydoux. Her style was different, softer, more personal. She complimented their gowns, asked about the experience of filming such an intense story. With Craig, she touched lightly on the emotional conclusion. "It must feel like a tremendous release," she said, her tone conveying an understanding that went beyond the screen. They then took their seats in the royal box, a world apart yet fully on display. As the lights began their first dimming warning, Charles leaned slightly towards Camilla, a private word lost in the growing rustle of anticipation. They settled in, two figures schooled in a lifetime of public viewing, now becoming the viewed, as the famous fanfare filled the colossal hall and the MI6 logo filled the screen, merging their real-world narrative with the beginning of a fictional finale. The opening scenes of No Time to Die unfolded with a familiar yet fresh intensity, a sun-drenched Italian vista, a vintage car, a betrayal that was both personal and visceral. In the royal box, the Prince of Wales watched with the attentive focus of a man who understands narrative. He was not merely a passive viewer. He was analyzing the craft, the depiction of landscapes. He made a mental note about the beauty of Matera, the themes of trust and legacy that echoed through the script. During a quiet moment between action sequences, he leaned over and whispered a comment to an aide about the impressive aerial photography, a testament to the skill of British stunt and film crews. For Charles, the film was a tapestry of national achievement. The technology, the locations, the actors, the writers. Each explosion was a symphony of British special effects expertise. Each sleek Aston Martin was a nod to iconic British design. He watched Daniel Craig's weary, resolute Bond with a certain professional empathy. He recognized the burden of a role that becomes an identity, the expectation to constantly perform at peak capacity for a watching world. The parallel, though unspoken, hung in the dark air. Here was a man, Bond, whose duty cost him personal happiness, who was called back to service just as he thought he was free. Charles's own life, a relentless call to duty from the moment of his birth, was a different kind of protocol, but The core of sacrifice was a language he understood fluently. Beside him, Camilla experienced the film on a more emotional frequency. The storyline of Bond's lost love, Madeline Swan, and the secret child resonated deeply. The scenes of domesticity shattered by the past, the fierce protectiveness, the loneliness of carrying a heavy secret. These were human chords, not action tropes. Her eyes grew moist during the quieter, character-driven moments. She was watching a story about the consequences of love in a dangerous world, about the impossibility of outrunning history. Her own life had been lived in a relentless spotlight, her past forever tangled with her present in the public narrative. She understood scrutiny. She understood the desire to shield loved ones. When Bond tenderly said goodbye to his daughter, Camilla's hand, resting on the arm of her chair, tightened almost imperceptibly. Her engagement was not with the spectacle, but with the heartbreak woven beneath it. She also watched the formidable female characters, Lynch's Nomi, the new 007, and Seydoux' psychologically complex Madeline, with keen interest. These were women of agency, skill, and deep emotional resilience. In them, she perhaps saw reflections of the strength required of women in her own sphere, where battles are fought with smiles and silence, and armor is woven from dignity and patience. As the film raced towards its devastating climax on Saffin's Island, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. The final sacrifice, Bond standing on the missile gantry, accepting his fate to save his family, was delivered with a crushing solemnity. The silence in the Royal Albert Hall was absolute, profound. In that shared, breathless moment, the boundaries between the fictional and the real, the cinematic and the royal, blurred entirely. Here was a story about the ultimate duty, dying for the future of those you love, for the safety of the nation. The themes were monarchic in their scale. Charles's posture remained erect, but his expression was one of grave contemplation. The weight of ultimate sacrifice, of a death for a greater cause, is the bedrock of the monarchy's symbolic power, the idea of service unto death. For Camilla, the final phone call between Bond and Madeline was almost too much to bear. It was a goodbye laced with love and terrible acceptance. A single, discreet tear traced a path down her cheek, quickly brushed away. She was not crying for James Bond. She was crying for all the unspoken goodbyes, the private sorrows that must be borne in public lives, the personal cost of a destiny one does not choose. The credits rolled, and for a long second, there was only the haunting melody of Billie Eilish's theme song. Then, the dam broke. A standing ovation began, thunderous, emotional, and sustained. The lights came up slowly, revealing faces streaked with tears, even among the most hardened critics. Charles and Camilla rose to their feet with the audience. Their applause was respectful, measured, but their expressions were marked by the experience. Charles's eyes scanned the hall, taking in the unified, cathartic reaction of the crowd. This was the power of story, he thought, to unite thousands in a single, shared feeling. Camilla, recomposed, her soft smile back in place, applauded the cast and crew on screen, a gesture of thanks for the journey. They were the first to leave their box, a signal for the evening to transition to its next phase. As they moved through the private corridor towards the reception, the sound of the ovation followed them like a wave. The film was over, but the night's most delicate act, the mingling, the public processing of a profoundly emotional experience, was just beginning. They had shared in the collective catharsis. Now, they had to lead the aftermath. The reception in the hall's opulent galleries was a study in contrasting energies. The raw emotion from the auditorium now mixed with champagne-fueled relief and celebratory chatter. Stars hugged, laughed, and sighed, decompressing from the narrative grip of the film they had just witnessed. Into this scene, the prince and duchess moved with practiced ease. They were no longer just attendees. They were roving ambassadors of the state, offering a stabilizing, gracious presence. Charles sought out director Cary Joji Fukunaga. Their conversation moved from the technical challenges of the long, single-take opening sequence to the director's deliberate choice of classic Bond tropes, subverted. Charles listened intently, asking insightful questions about location scouting in Jamaica, drawing a link to the Commonwealth. With composer Hans Zimmer, he discussed the use of the classic theme, weaving the old with the new, a constant challenge in any tradition. Camilla found herself surrounded by the film's women. She shared a warm, laughing moment with Lashana Lynch, who described the physical training for her role. "I think my days would be easier if I had your training regimen," Camilla quipped. With Naomi Harris, she spoke of Moneypenny's evolution from a desk-bound role to a field agent. "It's about finding your own agency within an established structure, isn't it?" Camilla observed, a comment that resonated on multiple levels. She then spent several minutes with Billie Eilish and her brother Phineas, complimenting the haunting song that had underscored the final, tragic moments. "You captured the loneliness perfectly," she said, and the young singer, usually so cool, seemed genuinely moved. Throughout, they were a calming pole. Their presence gave the event a historic gravity, allowing the filmmakers to feel their work was not just entertainment, but a valued piece of the national fabric. The transition from the collective, dark intimacy of the cinema to the glittering scrutiny of the after-party was always a stark one. For the royals, it was a shift in gears from absorbed observers to active participants in a living, breathing social ecosystem. The venue, a spectacularly transformed space in a nearby Grand Museum, throbbed with music and the clinking of glasses. Here, the film's gravity was slowly being replaced by the levity of celebration. Prince Charles, a glass of water in hand, found himself in a circle that included producer Barbara Broccoli and veteran actor Jeffrey Wright. The conversation turned, inevitably, to legacy. Broccoli spoke of her father, Albert Cubby Broccoli, and the weight of stewarding this behemoth for 6 decades. Charles nodded in profound understanding. "It is a peculiar thing to be the custodian of a story that is so much bigger than oneself," he said. "The key, I have found, is to respect the roots while allowing the branches to reach for new light." It was a comment about the Bond franchise, but also about the monarchy, about the Duchy of Cornwall, about his environmental work. Jeffrey Wright, who played Felix Leiter, spoke of the honor of being part of such a long-running narrative. "You feel you're stepping into history," he said. "A living history," Charles corrected gently, "and that is the most demanding kind. It requires constant, careful renewal." The talk was of art, but the subtext was of inheritance and duty, a language Charles spoke natively. Across the room, Camilla was holding court in a different manner. She had been joined by Dame Judi Dench, a friend and a former whose presence bridged the film world and the royal one seamlessly. Their conversation was peppered with laughter. They were later joined by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, one of the film's writers, whose wit was as sharp as a martini stirrer. They discussed the challenge of writing dialogue for our icon. One tries to give him a voice that feels both timeless and surprisingly human, Waller-Bridge said. "Ah, the surprisingly human," Camilla repeated with a knowing chuckle. "That is often the most difficult part to convey, isn't it? When everyone thinks they already know the character." It was a light comment that spoke volumes about her own life. She asked Waller-Bridge about her process, listening with genuine interest as the writer described the collaborative energy of the writer's room. This was not mere small talk. It was a deliberate engagement with the creative minds behind the spectacle, an intellectual curiosity that shone through the social glaze. Camilla had a gift for making people feel seen beyond their public persona, and, in turn, these sharp, creative women were seeing her not just as a duchess, but as a woman of intelligence and wit. As the evening wore on, the prince performed a duty unique to his position, the subtle, unscripted act of morale-boosting. He spotted Ana de Armas, whose scene-stealing role as Paloma had brought a burst of joyful energy to the film's first half. She was speaking quietly with her partner. Charles approached, and her eyes widened slightly with nervous respect. "My dear, you were quite magnificent," he began. That sequence was a ballet of chaos. You managed to be both entirely lethal and utterly delightful. A very difficult balance to strike. The young actress beamed, the compliment from the future king instantly erasing any lingering nerves. He did the same with Rami Malek, acknowledging the quiet, chilling menace of his Safin. "It is the quiet ones you must watch," Charles said, almost playfully. "A whisper can be far more terrifying than a shout." You understood that perfectly. These were not generic praises. They were specific, observed, and therefore immensely powerful. He was, in his way, bestowing a form of royal recognition upon their craft, an accolade that existed outside of trophies and reviews. Meanwhile, Camilla engaged in her own kind of quiet diplomacy. She noticed Lashana Lynch standing momentarily alone, taking in the scene. She moved to her side. "It must be overwhelming," Camilla said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. Lynch admitted it was that the magnitude of stepping into the 007 number was only now, in this moment of celebration, truly sinking in. "Remember," Camilla advised softly, "the armor they give you, whether it's a script or a title, is only as strong as the person wearing it. You have clearly brought your own strength. That is what matters." It was a moment of pure, woman-to-woman mentorship, transcending race, age, and wildly different life experiences. Later, Camilla also made a point of speaking with the film's costume designer, Sutterat Larlerb, discussing the practical challenges of creating elegant clothing that also allowed for stunt work. A metaphor, perhaps, for the need for royal attire to be both magnificent and functional, allowing its wearer to navigate crowds, shake hands, and sit for hours with equal ease. The clock neared the royal departure time. Before leaving, Charles and Camilla shared a final, public moment with Daniel Craig and Rachel Weisz. The four stood together, a tableau that captured the essence of the night: the crown and the star, duty and artistry, tradition and its evolution. Photographers respectfully captured the image. Charles thanked Craig once more, his hand on the actor's shoulder. "You have left an indelible mark. Now you must enjoy the freedom." Craig's reply was heartfelt. "Thank you, sir. It has been a privilege." Camilla and Rachel Weisz exchanged a few words about family, about the peace that comes after a long project is finally released to the world. Then, with a final wave to the room, the prince and duchess turned. Their exit was as understated as their entrance. They did not slip away, but they left before the party's peak, adhering to an invisible timetable known only to their team. As their car pulled away from the lingering crowds and the still glowing lights, the sound of the celebration faded into the hum of London at night. Inside the quiet Bentley, they likely did not speak much. The shared experience of the film, the emotional toll of the performances, and the social marathon of the evening would have left them in a companionable silence. They had done their duty and done it with a grace that had elevated the entire event. They had connected, commended, and comforted. The glitz was behind them. The reality of their ongoing service lay ahead with the dawn. The morning after the premiere dawned clear and bright over London, a city already moving on to the next headline. At Clarence House, however, the evening's echoes lingered in the form of official correspondence and private reflection. Prince Charles was at his desk early, as was his habit. Before him lay a stack of letters and emails requiring his attention, but his mind, for a few moments, replayed scenes from the night before. He dictated a personal note to Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson. It was not a generic thank you letter. He referenced specific elements of the film: the treatment of legacy, the stunning use of Scottish landscape, which he noted would help tourism, and the dignified conclusion to Craig's tenure. The film serves as a powerful reminder of the resilience and excellence of the British creative industries during challenging times, he wrote, turning the experience into a piece of statecraft, a formal acknowledgement of cultural contribution. He also made a note to his office to explore a potential link between the Duchy of Cornwall's sustainable housing projects and the film industry's need for studio space, his brain forever making connective tissue between disparate spheres of national life. Camilla, meanwhile, spent part of her morning in a sunlit sitting room, going over the press clippings with her communications secretary. The headlines were universally positive. Royals add regal touch to Bond premiere. Camilla's emotional reaction to film's ending. Charles and Camilla charm 007 cast. She was pleased, not for herself, but because the coverage focused on the film and the positive interaction, not on any faux pas or awkwardness. It had been, in the intricate calculus of public perception, a success. She asked her secretary to ensure thank you messages were sent to the organizers of the Royal Albert Hall and the security details, a gesture of courtesy that was never overlooked. Her thoughts drifted to the conversations with the younger actresses. She made a mental note to include some of the charities supporting women in the film and technology industries in her upcoming engagements. The night had not just been an outing. It had been a source of insight, a window into a different world of female strength and creative struggle. The public reaction, as monitored by the palace press teams, was fascinating in its nuance. On social media, clips of the royals interacting with the cast were widely shared. A moment where Camilla laughed with Phoebe Waller-Bridge was captioned "The Duchess" and "The Queen of Wit." A photo of Charles speaking intently with Hans Zimmer spawned memes about the Prince of Tones. The overall sentiment was one of approval, even warmth. The public saw a future king and queen who were not relics behind glass, but could navigate a modern, glamorous event with ease and apparent enjoyment. They were seen as supporters, not just spectators. Commentary pieces noted how their presence had lent the premiere a sense of national occasion, tying a global blockbuster back to its British roots. It was a masterclass in soft power, and the palace, while never commenting directly on such analysis, would have noted the positive metrics with quiet satisfaction. For the Bond franchise producers and stars, the royal attendance was the final, validating seal on their years of work. In interviews given later that day, Daniel Craig called it the perfect end to the journey. Barbara Broccoli said, "Having their royal highnesses there, understanding the weight of what this film represents, was incredibly moving. It felt like a blessing." For the international cast and crew, especially the Americans like Rami Malek and Jeffrey Wright, it was a uniquely British experience, a taste of a history and a hierarchy that was both formal and surprisingly personal. The fact that Charles had known the specifics of their roles, that Camilla had engaged with the emotional core of the story, left a lasting impression. It made the event feel historic, not just promotional. Back within the palace walls, the impact was subtler, but no less real. The younger members of the family, particularly those more immersed in popular culture, would have taken note. The successful blending of a massively popular cinematic event with serious royal duty offered a modern blueprint. It demonstrated that relevance did not mean abandoning dignity, that engagement with contemporary culture could be done with intelligence and purpose. The evening served as a case study, a proof of concept that the monarchy could inhabit spaces of global popular culture without being diminished by them, but rather by bringing its own unique gravity, enhancing them. The artifacts of the night, the official program, a few selected photographs, will be filed away in the royal archives, a record of a night when the crown and the world's most famous spy came together, each reflecting a different facet of British identity back to a watching world. Weeks bled into months, and the frenetic energy of the premiere night faded into memory, replaced by the steady, relentless rhythm of royal duty. No Time to Die, open to record-breaking box office numbers and critical acclaim, its ending debated by fans across the globe. The glittering dresses and tailored tuxedos were returned to vaults and wardrobes. Yet in quiet, tangible ways, the threads woven that October night continued to pull through the fabric of the royals' work and public perception. For Prince Charles, the connection to the arts solidified into action. At his next speech for the British Film Institute, he referenced the premiere not as a social event, but as a testament to the collective national endeavor of filmmaking. He announced a small, new pilot scheme developed after conversations stemming from that night, which would offer apprenticeships on film sets for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds interested in behind-the-camera roles in lighting, sound, set design. It was a practical, tangible outcome. The film's themes of environmental stewardship also found echo. In a podcast interview recorded some time later, discussing the future of cities, he unexpectedly cited the derelict island base in the film. We see in these stories the nightmare of unchecked technological and biological power, he said. It is a fictional warning, but it underscores the very real need for responsible, sustainable innovation. The Bond franchise, in his mind, had become a useful allegory for the causes he championed. Camilla's engagements began to reflect subtle influences from her conversations. At a literary festival, she championed the work of screenwriters as modern storytellers, weaving narratives that shape our culture as powerfully as any novel. She hosted a reception for women in the arts, and her guest list included not just painters and sculptors, but a prominent female stunt coordinator and a renowned film editor. When she spoke of resilience and finding one's voice, her examples felt broader, informed by the stories of the women she'd met from the Bond world. The memory of her emotional reaction to the film also seemed to grant her public persona a new layer of perceived authenticity. In a subsequent solo engagement at a hospice, she spoke more openly about grief and legacy with patients, her comfort level palpably deeper. The film had touched a nerve of genuine emotion, and that authenticity had resonated with the public, making her subsequent displays of empathy feel even more connected and real. The public's image of the couple underwent a gentle but significant refresh. The Glitzy premiere was no longer an anomaly in their story, but a key chapter that recontextualized them. They were now seen as a more versatile duo, as comfortable in the rain at a Welsh farm as under the Klieg lights at a global movie event. Polls showed a slight but measurable increase in their appeal, particularly among younger demographics who had followed the Bond event online. They were perceived as being more in touch, without having sacrificed an ounce of their traditional standing. The carefully curated images from the night, Charles in deep conversation, Camilla sharing a laugh, became part of their visual legacy, used in profiles and documentaries to illustrate their ease in the 21st century media landscape. For the monarchy as an institution, the night served as an important, low-risk stress test. It proved the apparatus could handle a high-security, globally televised event that was inherently informal and emotionally charged. It demonstrated that the royal family could share the spotlight with mega-celebrities without being overshadowed, because they offered something different: history, continuity, and a symbolic weight that no actor, no matter how beloved, could possess. The success of the evening became a template for future engagements with major cultural moments, a way for the crown to participate in national celebrations that were not strictly ceremonial or charitable, but cultural and communal. Finally, on a purely human level for Charles and Camilla themselves, the premiere of No Time to Die likely remained a vivid, shared milestone. It was a night where their duty involved immersion in a powerful piece of storytelling, where their roles required empathy and engagement with art. It was a departure from the often dry routine of openings and visits. In the years to come, during the endless cycle of handshakes and speeches, the memory of that night, the collective gasp of the audience, the haunting music, the charged conversations with artists at the peak of their powers, would have served as a reminder of the breadth of the nation they served. It was a reminder that Britain's power lay not just in its history or its institutions, but in its ability to tell stories that captivated the world. And, for one night, they had not just witnessed that power. They had, with grace and quiet intelligence, become a part of its telling. The final curtain had fallen on Daniel Craig's Bond, but for the future king and queen consort, it had been a compelling act in their own ongoing, real-life story of service and adaptation. The morning air in London was cool and carried the smell of rain. The city moved on from the big night at the movies. People went back to work and school. The bright lights of the premiere were gone. But inside the walls of the royal households, the effects of that evening were just beginning to grow. For Prince Charles, the connection to the Bond film was more than just a nice memory. It became a tool he could use in his work. A few weeks after the premiere, he had to give a very important speech. It was about supporting young people in the arts. He stood at a podium in a room full of important people from theaters and film schools. He did not just talk about old paintings or classical music. He talked about the movie he had seen. He told the audience about the hundreds of people it takes to make a film like that. He mentioned the car designers who made the Aston Martin. He praised the set builders who created whole worlds. He spoke about the costume makers and the sound engineers. He said these were skilled jobs for modern Britain. They were jobs that could inspire a new generation. Because of what he saw and who he met that night, he started a new idea. He asked his office to create a special project. This project would find young people who were not sure what to do with their lives. It would give them a chance to visit a film studio for a week. They could try out different jobs behind the camera. Charles believed that seeing the real work might spark a passion in them. He thought the film industry needed fresh talent from all parts of the country. This small plan was a direct result of his night at the Bond premiere. He also used the film's story in his talks about the environment. At a meeting about keeping the oceans clean, he surprised everyone. He talked about the villain's island in the movie. He said the story showed the danger of science without a heart. He said the movie was a warning about what could happen if people did not respect nature. He connected the fiction to the very real problems the world faces. People listened because he was talking about something exciting and popular. It made his serious message easier to hear. For Camilla, the days after the premiere were also busy with new purpose. She had been so moved by the women in the film. She thought about Lashana Lynch's character, who became the new 007. She thought about Leah Seydoux' character, who was a mother and a fighter. She remembered her talk with Phoebe Waller-Bridge, the writer. These women were strong in different ways. They were smart and brave. They were not just decorations in the story. Camilla decided to focus more on this idea of women's strength. At her next public event, she visited a charity that helped women learn new skills to find jobs. She gave a speech there. She did not use her usual words about charity. Instead, she talked about the women from the Bond film. She said that real strength is not about being loud. It is about being determined. It is about getting back up when you're knocked down. She said every woman has a kind of inner armor. The young women at the charity listened closely. They saw a duchess who understood modern stories. It made her seem closer to them. She also made sure to keep reading the scripts of films and plays. She asked her staff to find stories written by women. She wanted to support female storytellers. She invited a group of women who wrote for television to a palace garden party. It was a small thing, but it sent a message. The message was that the Duchess of Cornwall valued their work. The night at the premiere had opened a door in her mind. It showed her how powerful stories could be in shaping how people see the world and see women. The public did not forget the night either. Pictures from the premiere were everywhere. Newspapers and magazines published special photo spreads. They showed Charles talking seriously with Daniel Craig. They showed Camilla laughing with the actors. On the internet, people shared short video clips. One popular clip showed Camilla wiping a tear during the sad ending. Another showed Charles looking impressed during an action scene. People wrote nice comments. They said things like the royals are actually quite cool, and they seem to really get it. This good feeling helped the royal family. It made them seem more relatable. It was hard for people to say they were old-fashioned or out of touch when they had just been at the coolest movie event of the year. Younger people who did not usually care about the royals took a second look. They saw a future king and queen who could walk into a room full of movie stars and not seem out of place. It was a quiet victory for the palace staff who worked hard on their image. For the staff themselves, the premiere was a lesson. They learned they could handle a big, complicated modern event. It was not like a military parade with everything planned to the second. It was more fluid. There were celebrities and reporters and fans screaming. The security was a huge challenge, but they managed it without any problems. They saw how well Charles and Camilla handled the pressure. They saw how the public reacted. This gave them confidence to plan for more events like this in the future. Events that were about popular culture, not just tradition. Months later, the film was still being talked about. It was being released on DVD and streaming services. A newspaper decided to write a big article looking back at the premiere. They called it "The Night Bond Went Royal." They interviewed some of the palace staff off the record. They also talked to people from the film studio. The article said the premiere was a perfect meeting of two great British institutions. One was very old, the monarchy. One was relatively new, the Bond movies. Both were known all over the world. Both represented a certain idea of Britain. The article said the royal presence gave the film a special blessing, and the film's excitement gave the royals a touch of modern glamour. Charles and Camilla likely read this article. They probably did not talk about it much in public, but in private it might have made them think. They had spent their whole lives in the public eye. They were used to being symbols, but that night they were also fans. They were part of an audience feeling the same emotions as everyone else. That was a rare thing for them. It was a break from always being the ones on the stage. It was a chance to just be people watching a story unfold. As time went on, other members of the royal family had their own big events. There were weddings and births and tours to other countries. The Bond premiere became one event among many in the royal calendar, but it held a special place. It was not about family or diplomacy. It was about culture. It showed that the monarchy could be a champion for the creative heart of the nation. One day Charles would become king. His duties would become even heavier. The memory of that glittering night might seem small then, but the lessons would remain. The lesson that to lead a country, you must also understand its culture. You must celebrate the things that make its people proud. The James Bond films, with their mix of action and style and dry humor, were definitely one of those things. For now, life returned to its normal rhythm. Charles visited farms and made speeches about climate change. Camilla opened new libraries and met with victims of violence. Their schedules were filled with the usual work. But if you looked closely, you could see little changes. In Charles's speeches, you might hear a reference to storytelling or design thinking. In Camilla's wardrobe, you might see a slight nod to a bolder color or style, perhaps inspired by the confidence of the women she met. And sometimes on a quiet evening, when they had no public duties, they might choose to watch a film. The staff would set up the private cinema room in one of their homes. We cannot know for sure what they would choose to watch, but perhaps once in a while they would select an older Bond film. They would sit in the dark, not as prince and duchess, but as a husband and wife enjoying a story. And as the famous theme music played, they might share a look that remembered a night when their duty felt not like a burden, but like a privilege. A night when they got to step into a world of fantasy and, in doing so, help bridge the gap between an ancient crown and the modern world. The story of Bond was about an end and a beginning. And for them that night was not an end, but a promising new chapter in their own long story of service.